Okay, in chapter 3, as we were looking at that Wednesday night and just kind of going and maybe getting our thinking a little bit focused a little tighter on where James is going with this chapter. If you recall in the first verse of chapter 3, he's talking about the idea of teachers. And he extends the warning there to teachers because of the greater judgment on them and so forth. We also talked about, as we proceeded through that whole set of verses right there, that teachers apply to us because that's what we're all to be. And we've talked about that. We've shown that in Hebrews, where the Hebrew people were talked about there in Hebrews chapter 5 for not developing, for not getting to that point of being a teacher. They had needed someone teach them again. So the fundamental thoughts and the ideas that we're talking about in chapter 3 hit us pretty hard, hit us right here. Okay? And he goes into a discussion then of the use of the tongue. And of course, you can think about that from the standpoint of a teacher, okay, us, that the use of the tongue is incredibly important because the use of the tongue should be talking about those things of a spiritual nature, those things of good things, and not the destruction of other people and other type of things. So when we get down to verse 13, James talks about then and starts to dial things in a little closer in that section on page 29 in our workbook, verses 13 through 18. In verse 13, the author here of the book asks the question, what kind of a man does James refer to in verse 13?
Wise man.
Wise person. Now, is this somebody that, how would you define wise?
Somebody that's renewed with knowledge.
Okay.
And good judgment.
Good judgment. Dialing it up.
Knowledgeable, but knowing how to use the knowledge wisely.
Okay. Yeah. All right. No, I got you. Knowing how to use it, and that's very important, and in understanding as well. Wisdom and in understanding. There's more to it than just knowing. If I know this book, and that's as far as it goes, what good is that? None. I mean, I know the book. I mean, that's all well and good. But how does that help someone else? It doesn't. Okay? And the idea of wisdom, being wise and understanding is not from a boastful, I know the book thing. That's not from that point at all. It's a manner of life. It's an understanding that the wisdom is there, but it's demonstrated in how I live. Not from any kind of a boastful, I'm proud to do that. That's got nothing to do with it. But people can see by how I am and how I live the wisdom that I have. And that's where James is going with this, because he wants us to see that there's two different kinds of wisdoms. And he's going to talk about this in the next few verses. And as he talks about wisdom, we have a choice. We have a choice. We can choose to the wisdom of God, and if we don't choose that wisdom, guess where that comes from? Verse 15 says demonic is the last word, and that gives you the idea of where that other kind of wisdom can come from. So as he begins this discussion, and as he talks about this in verse 13, question A is, what is a wise man to show?
His works.
Okay.
Conduct.
Okay. Behavior, his conduct. And again, it's not something that is done from a boastful point of view, but it's just a part of who he is. It's just a part of who the person is. That's how they act. That's how they show and try to do things in a very positive way, but more importantly, in a very godly way. And that's where James is going with this. How does he show his works?
Good conduct.
Okay, and what does the verse talk about? Okay, manner of life. Okay, there's how it's tying together. There's how it is. It's the manner of life that he's showing there in gentleness and in wisdom. He's showing his works that way. Now, can those who hear our words and see our works tell what kind of a person we are?
Yes.
you can spot it a mile away, good or bad. Okay? Good or bad, you can spot it a mile off. Okay? And you can understand that the answer to that is a resounding yes. How does Jesus say, you shall know a man? And he refers to Matthew chapter 7, verse 20.
By his fruits, by his fruits.
By his fruits. By his fruits. By what he is. And that can be a good fruit. Can be bad fruit. Correct? And we've all been down that road. We all know what this is. Well, we all know what this is. We all have somebody that's probably come to our mind one way or the other that falls into that category. So we see that the wisdom that James is talking about in verse 13 is certainly that comes from God. That's wisdom that we're using based on his word and what he would have us to do. Now, the author of the book does a nice little deal right here, because he diverts our attention for just a minute from James, and he goes over and he gets us to Matthew chapter 12. And if you'd like to turn there with me just a minute. Matthew chapter 12. And beginning in verse 33. Nick, have you got that? Verses 33 to 37.
Either make the tree good and its fruits good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. Blood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned.
Okay, the Lord speaks here in some ideas relative to words that reveal our character, and they're pretty sobering. Now, bear in mind, as we've talked about this in the book of James so far, there's not a one of us sitting in this building this don't hit. Okay? Not a one. All right? So he's dialing this into us to tell us and to show us that what we say, first of all, in the first question there, out of what does the mouth speak?
Heart. Heart.
Abundance of the heart. Abundance of the heart.
Think about that. Think about that.
What we think about is what we usually talk about when we get together.
Good or bad?
Good or bad.
Good or bad. You're right. There's where this is taking us. This is where James is taking us to understand that this wisdom, the godliness that we should have, comes from above. And if there's anything else there, we'll see that in a little bit in some other verses that we're going to talk about. It's not of God. Now, how comfortable do we get with just talking? Not giving thought to what we're saying, who we're hurting, what's going on. We just talk. You see the point. We're better off to keep our mouth shut. We're better off to keep our mouth shut than to say something, talk about something that's not godly from the standpoint of the topic that we're talking about or the person that we're talking about, as opposed to just running our mouth. Why is that? The book, we just answered the question, because that's what we're thinking about. That's what's in our minds. That's what's going on in our head. And it's like Junior said, when it's going on like that, that's what we talk about. That's what we talk about. And if we dwell on that kind of stuff, guess what takes over? That stuff. And that's all we think about. And that's all we dwell on. And that's all we talk about when it gets to those issues. So godliness does not go down that road. Godliness uses wisdom from the Word of God right here, and speaking his truths, and then speaking about other people. And so the author here does a nice job of diverting our thought to this, to let us understand that this goes even deeper. Okay? If we speak evil, what does that tell others? And we've already talked about that. What is in our heart? What we're dwelling on. All right? But see, of what shall we give an account in the day of judgment?
Every hour we speak.
Now let that one sink in. Let that one sink in. The next time you want to blast a neighbor, or the next time you want to blast somebody because of what they did or didn't do, understand someone's going to ask you about that. And at that point, when they ask you about it, it's too late to duck the bullet. It's too late. So that's what I appreciate this passage that the author here puts in here, because it lets us understand the seriousness of what we say, the seriousness of this kind of stuff, because it's not going to just fly by as we'd like it to let it fly by and just talk about it. Well, what's the deal? You know, it's not a problem. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Because the verses talk about we're going to give an account for that when the day is over. And then verse 37 is so powerful. It says in point D, by our words you shall be justified, and you shall be. There you go. That puts it out there. That's the significance of what we're taught. It's not something just to fluff off. It's something to really give some thought and consideration to. Ideas? Give me some feedback. What do you think?
It hits us all.
I hope so. It hits me hard. I mean, it hits me hard because it's like we were talking about Wednesday night. I got such a kick out of Herb because he knows Cincinnati traffic like I do. And what'd you say the last time you was cut off on the road? I bet it wasn't too complimentary. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. That's the kind of, all at once we just pop off. Okay? And that's the kind of thing that James is talking about. Keeping ourselves under control. Keeping ourselves the way we would have it. Because when we pick up in verse 14 now, it says, but if you have bitter jealousy, back in James now, James chapter 3, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. The question asked relative to verse 14, what is envy? And I think your passage, your King James version uses envy and strife there instead of bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. But we'll talk about that. What is envy?
Jealousy.
True. What else? I heard something else. Jealousy. Okay.
Could be resentment too.
Is that, yes, it can be. And when it hooks the word bitter to it, it takes it a step deeper. Okay? Here's what we're talking about. Bitter jealousy is what it's talking about here. We're not just talking about something I wish I had what they have. That certainly can be involved in it. It's the idea of a piercing. It's the idea I want that to the detriment of someone else, and I'm going to do whatever I can do to get it. That's the level that it's taking it. Okay? Bitter, hateful, a zeal, something to do, anything in an unfavorable way I'm going to do to achieve it. That's the idea of envy as it's used here in this passage. Bitter jealousy. That's hateful. That's hateful. Okay? And so when we take a look at that, that then leads to bitter jealousy and then strife or selfish ambition, verse 14 there. What's the idea of strife?
Quarreling, arguing.
Contention.
Okay, what Earl?
Contention.
Contention, okay, that's right. Bitter conflict, discord. Anything like, do you see where all this can go? And it just starts to accumulate and starts to snowball and get bigger and bigger till it's finally got us consumed. Till it's got us consumed. And it can go that route. Now, can we ignore it and say well, it doesn't, that's not me? Well, if we do that, please understand we're sticking our head in the sand. Okay? All of us can fall into that trap. But when we see it and we understand what it is, we need to understand, whoa, I'm not going the right direction here. I need to get that fixed. I need to stop that. Now, the question is, who can stop it?
Yourself.
Anybody else?
God,
There's where I'm wanting us to understand this. I can't fix you. You can't fix me. Okay? I have to have it based on these verses that we're looking at here in my mind, and I see my mistake. I see where I'm at, and I'm going to take steps to fix it. Because if we fix it now, we have the opportunity to fix it, and we can. God will help us do that. But if we choose to ignore it, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And if we don't ever see how to fix it, it never gets fixed. And that's sad. Because as we talked about in Matthew, as we read in Matthew, when we stand before God, it's too late. It's too late. And so that's why this James just does an incredible job of painting this picture for us so that we can understand what's going on. Thoughts, ideas? Okay, I wrote down a note here, just a question I thought of when we put things in the mind here. Do we have strife today?
No.
Really?
No.
Just turn on the news, huh?
You mean in the church?
All of the above. But yeah. Yeah. Sure we do. Now, with that said, with that thought in mind, what do we do about it? I mean, if we're sitting 8 hours a day watching the news, we got a problem. We got a problem. Because that is only going to create ill feelings, strife, anxieties, all the kind of things that we're talking about here. Because that's all you see. That's all that's there. That's all they want to show. Okay? And so if that is the picture that's presented, that's what's going to be on our mind. And that's what's going to be there. So we want to, every opportunity. Go ahead.
It's just like I've seen before. If you work in a prison, you think everybody's bad. Or if you're a policeman, you think everybody's bad. If you're in the hospital, you think everybody's sick. So
Okay.
if you sit and watch news, like you say, 8 hours a day, all you see is this quarreling and bickering, and you think it's just that way.
Mhm.
So you need to get yourself away from that stuff.
Right.
A lot.
Right. And all of that, I mean, while we think, I mean, we'll sit there and we'll say, well, I can handle that. Really? Let the rubber hit the road and you start talking about things, and what comes into your conversation? Well, did you see this on the news? Did you see this on the TV? That kind of thing. That's where it does make an impression. It does make us think. And so James is trying to get us to understand that the wisdom from above doesn't dwell on that kind of stuff. And if we let this other stuff get into our minds, verse 15 says, this wisdom, that kind of worldly wisdom that we're talking about, is not which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. Demonic. The term natural there, you guys might have another word there. What do you have?
Earthly, sensual, and devilish.
Okay. All right. Earthly. There's the idea. Okay. And so we can see how James categorizes what those kinds of feelings and those kinds of thoughts can be. Where there is envy and strife, what else is there?
Confusion. And every evil work.
You ever seen that? a pretty ugly picture. It's a pretty ugly picture. And so when that exists, there's nothing there that comes out of that is good. How are such things, and we just read that in verse 15, described as being earthly, unspiritual is a good word for in there too, in another version that I read. And it just has nothing good hooked to it whatsoever. But James doesn't leave us there. And I think that's the important thing that we need to see there, because as we get, and I found this interesting too, in verse 16, where that the author of the book, and normally he's as thorough as he can be, but he just blew past verse 16, didn't say a word. Okay? But take a look at what it says. For where jealousy or envy and strife or selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every evil thing. And he just flew by that and didn't make a comment about it. But confusion, instability, disorder, all of that kind of stuff shows up. Go ahead, Billy.
Well, when I read verse 16, I look back at verse 14 there, where he talks about if you have this is a possibility. If you're in this way, if you've got bitter envy and self-seeking in your heart, then verse 16 is going to show the fruits of what verse 14 is talking about, because you're going to have, again, self-seeking, you're going to have confusion, and every evil thing are there. I mean, it's when you're self-seeking for yourself, you're not concerned about the truth, you're not concerned about the church, you're not concerned about nothing except what satisfies your appetite here. So that was the observation that I was thinking.
Right. I mean, the personal agenda that people get on is pretty amazing. And whatever it takes to accomplish that is generally what they set out to do. Whatever I have to do to make my idea work, that's what I'm going to do, no matter who I hurt. No matter who I hurt. No matter who I hurt. And we've seen people like that, and hopefully none of us have ever get into a spot like that. But that's the kind of thing that this kind of thinking and this kind of thought process will take us. Maybe not initially, maybe not right away, but as it develops, as it evolves, as it moves, it can get here. It can get here. And when it does, it's not good. Okay? But then James doesn't leave us in that kind of a thought process. And again, this has been if you look at Scripture very much, you see that there's a negative thing stated, there's something stated that you don't want to be like this, so if you don't want to be like this, this is what you should be. And he goes on in verse 17, and he lets us know that. But with wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and in good fruits, unwavering and without hypocrisy. And I just answered the first question there on page 30. With what are the 7 things that are listed there. But what are we talking about when we start seeing those lists of things? It's a nice list to read, very, very comforting. But what does it mean? What's pure?
Love.
I'm sorry?
Love.
Love, certainly involved in it. But thinking from, as the verse points out, but wisdom from above.
Pure would be like the pure word of God. You can put it like that, not a mixture with God's word. He could be pure in his thoughts. He could be, pure in his life and the way he lives it, or she, or whatever.
Idea of purity also brings with it clean, proper, and understand from God that's all it can be. Wisdom from above, as it talks about there in verse 17, is first pure. That means it doesn't get any better than that. It comes from God. That wisdom from God is first. But then look at the next phrase. Is first pure, then peaceable. So you can't get to the second point without entertaining the first. Okay? So the wisdom from God being pure, then as a result becomes peaceable, tending to preserve peace. How is that accomplished?
Not being quiet, keep your mouth shut.
That helps.
Think before you speak.
Yeah.
Think of others, because if you're not, you're wanting to get things started if you want something for yourself.
Right. Right.
Right.
And even though it might be truthful, okay, there are just some things that are better left unsaid. Okay? If it doesn't help the person or help the situation, it's going to throw gasoline on it and make it get bigger. Okay? And that's the point. That's the point. Peaceable is the idea of tending to... Now, does that mean ignore the truth? Does that mean ignore? No, we're not talking about that at all. But we're talking about, and then doctrinal issues, of course not. But when we're talking about just stuff, and that's basically what we all talk a lot about, is just stuff. Okay? This is the kind of thing that James is talking about. Pure, that being from God, then peaceable. Then peaceable. Better off, as Arvel said, just to not say nothing. I like your idea. All right, then the next idea is gentle. What's the idea? You would think we would know.
Being humble, I guess.
I'm sorry?
Being humble.
Okay. Another thought?
Not harsh.
Okay, not harsh. Okay. Patient. Think that works in there?
Not rude.
Not rude. Okay.
Listening to others.
Okay. Okay, absolutely. 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 So the gentleness that comes from that is also. How about reasonable? I see a lot of people squirming. What's reasonable about?
Well, the idea, I think, is easy to intrigue, because the next thing's coming up that you have a person that is willing
Okay.
to yield. When you go back, I think, to like the self-seeking person,
Mm-hmm.
most times they're not willing to yield. And therefore, their motives are not pure. Their motives, they're not seeking to have a peaceable solution to it. They may be arguing over what color the building ought to be painted on the inside, and rather than giving up, they would cause all kinds of trouble.
Sure.
This person is gentle, he's easy to intrigue, and he's willing to yield to what, like you said, if it's not hurting God's word, then why should we stand and argue over it?
Good point. Good point. Go ahead.
Be reasonable and realize that you're not without sin, or you're not perfect neither. When you're talking to somebody, nobody's perfect. You can't expect them to be perfect neither, you know?
Exactly. The idea, I think, coming with that was reasonable, is easy to entreat, easy to ask. Now, do you think I am? Do you think you are? Think about that. If we're not, why aren't we? Why aren't we? Is it because somebody's afraid that if I tell them something or ask them something, it's going to start a big fuss?
Do you know the answer? Do ask.
True. But it's the idea of being approachable. It's the idea of someone feeling comfortable in asking you a question or making a comment, knowing that's as far as it's going to go. You know, knowing that they're confiding in you or asking you something because they have some faith in you that you're going to be okay with it, you're going to give them an answer, and then that's going to be the end of it. Because I guarantee you, if you violate that, you're done.
Yeah, you keep going, you can make a mess of it.
Absolutely. And you're done with that person. They'll never come back. They'll never come back and ask you a second question if they've felt that what you said or what that conversation involved the first time got spread. It won't happen. Okay? Because you violated that feeling that they had. So there's a lot to being reasonable, if you will. Go ahead.
And you should, when you listen to somebody who talks about it, you shouldn't belittle what they're asking you, because we all have different levels of understanding, and I may understand this really well, but something over here obvious to someone else I might not, so we need to take that into consideration.
Absolutely. And you know, it's so easy to look at that and say, well, you ought to know the answer to that. Well, if they did, they wouldn't be asking you, right? You know, if they did, they wouldn't be asking you. But that's to your point exactly, in understanding that they don't know the answer, and we need to patiently, courteously give them the answer as we can. So it's a wonderful thing to be in that spot, and something that we need to give really some good attention to. How about then, right after that, reasonable, full of mercy? What does your verse say? Does it say full of mercy?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the idea?
Forgiving.
Forgiving. Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. Full of.
Gentle about the way you do it. You know what I mean? I think that's mercy when you're all discussing things.
Absolutely. Because there are situations that we come in contact with when certain answers said in a wrong way does a lot of damage. That might be the truth, okay, but in the manner in which they were stated can really inflict a lot of hurt, okay? And that's where the idea, I think, of understanding compassion, as Nick was talking about there, with forgiveness and bearing good fruit. What does for good fruit kind of represent?
Good works.
Good works. Okay, good works. Billy, go ahead.
Well, when you look at, I think with mercy, you know, mercy is given to some people that, just like us, you know, God showed us mercy, but what were we? We were enemies, really. He showed us mercy.
Yes.
And we as Christians, we need to show mercy, even though the person may be wrong in what they're doing. We still can show mercy. That don't mean that you accept them. You know, God had mercy on us. That didn't mean that He accepted us just the way we were. We had to do some changing too.
Right.
But He still had mercy on us. And so we should have mercy on people. And if we're not willing to show mercy, then the Bible teaches us that we'll have no mercy. And then the idea, I think, of the good fruit is the fact that having that mercy at a time with this person or whoever it may be, and you show this good fruit of having kindness toward them, will go a long way to converting that person.
Yes. Yes. Right words at the right time are always.
You got people that were raised Baptist or whatever, different denominations. They got parents that have lived and died that life. That's a sensitive conversation to be having with them about how they're not living right and they need to change their location and their ways of worship. You know what I mean? Because then you have to think about, well, then my mom and dad aren't going to heaven then, if you're right. You know what I mean? And that, you got to be gentle about things.
Yes, you do. I've got a friend in Cincinnati that's just down that road. What you're saying right there. If he would, and he knows the truth.
If he could get by that part, he could deal with it.
Yeah, and he would. Right. And he would if he could get past the part. If I admit and if I do this, then I'm saying that my mom and dad are wrong.
Right.
And he can't get past that.
That's hard to get over.
That's hard. And so your idea there of gentleness, patience, because you would think, you know, once the light went on and this guy has been associated with the church, I've never known him not to be. But he just can't get over that hump that if I do this, I'm saying mom and dad's lost.
Right.
And that's hard. And that's hard. Go ahead.
Well, I think, again, just to go back to make, observe it from that, it's like what Jesus said. If you love father, mother, sister, brother, even to the children, if you love them more than me, you're not worthy. I know that's a hard step for people to have to take, you know. And more so if you've lost a mom and a dad and things like that, because that is hard to say that, you know, they're wrong. But, you know, what I always look at people and say, look, if your mom and dad is alive, you know, when I talk to them and they're in a denomination, the point that I make to them is that you have the opportunity to be converted, and then through you, we can help convert them.
Help them, you bet.
But, you know, when somebody dies and goes into the eternity, it's no longer for us to say. We're to preach to the living.
Right. And that's and your point is also applicable from our standpoint right now as being living here this morning.
Right.
We can see these kinds of things and we can understand these kinds of things, but when we die, it's done. It's over. And where we are at that point is where we're going to be. And that's why these words are so important for us to take to heart. And for us to understand that this is the kind of person that we need to be in serving Him and serving others to the best of our ability in whatever way. What does unwavering kind of mean? You might have without partiality. What's the idea with that?
Firm.
Fair?
Firm.
Firm?
Be firm with it, yeah.
Don't be lukewarm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me spread it just a little thinner. Okay. You're right. I mean that's involved in it, because you take a position. That's the truth. I'm going to hold to that. That's good. But does that mean I'm going to say it in such a way, or I'm going to do it in such a way that someone else can be hurt by that? And I mean hurt by that from the standpoint of, I say it here and I don't say it there. It spreads it out further, so it's the same story everywhere. It's the same message everywhere. Unwavering. It's constant. It stays the same. The truth is always the truth. How we present it sometimes is what gets us.
Consistent.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Go ahead.
Well, you know, the Apostle Paul said that for as much as in him he's ready to preach it, not only to those in the wrong, but to the Greek, to the barbarian, to whoever it may be. And then he says, woe is on thee if I preach not the gospel. And then he tells the young man Timothy to preach the word. Now, the fact of it is that you can't be unwavering, because you go back to James chapter 1, and what is he saying here? Don't be a hearer of the word only, but a doer of it. You've got to preach the word. Regardless of where you're at and who you're standing with, you've got to preach the word. And that's what gets a lot of us in trouble, is because when we stand in certain places, we ain't got the backbone to preach the truth, because we know that the audience is going to disagree with us.
Right.
You gotta do it with wisdom.
Yes.
You got to do it with wisdom, but
Yes.
the truth has to come.
Yes. Truth. There's no compromising that, but how it's done
Right.
is open for some variation there. Yeah, I got you. Good point. The idea of concern and the idea of wisdom from above is just incredible. And of course, then the last phrase that he puts in verse 17 is without hypocrisy. And you would think, okay, if we've got all this other stuff in line, how does hypocrisy work into it?
Pretending to be something you ain't.
Be sincere.
Don't do as I say, not as I do, kind of thing.
You think so? Okay. Can that apply here?
Yes.
You know, the Bible says that some people did it for filthy lucre. So
Sure.
you've got to watch. You know, and that's what Paul talked about in chapter 9, verse 27 in 1 Corinthians, when he said, I have to bring under subjection my body. You know, he couldn't be a hypocrite about his life. Again, he even said to those in Rome, you know, do I teach you not to steal or commit a fornication and I turn around and do it myself?
Yeah.
That'd be hypocritical.
Absolutely. And I think the idea that James, we can have the appearance of these things listed here in verse 17, and really, it's just a show. And that's not right.
I don't think the shows are convincing if you're not living that life, though. You know what I mean? I've had people try to represent yourself or talk Bible, and I know that, you know, and it's not believable either, yeah.
Eventually, it will bite you if you're not. Eventually, it will bite you if you're trying to come across one way when in fact you're not. You can't keep it up forever. And eventually, you will make a mistake. And when you do, you're done. I mean, your credibility just went in the tank. You know, you're done. Okay? And so that's the idea of what James is talking about here. Without hypocrisy, this has got to come from a pure heart, from one who's trying to do the best that he can to serve the Lord, and then take steps in his life, in showing in his life that that's what he's committed to doing. It's a wonderful thought. Verse 18 then says, and the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make by those who make peace. So when these come, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to go back to what you said a while ago and then come back to verse 17.
Go ahead.
When Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mountain, when you look at Matthew chapter 5 here, you know, he talks about the merciful, he talks about the pure in heart, and then like the peacemaker.
Right.
And I think these three topics goes perfect with 17 and 18. Is because Jesus is teaching these, and these are some of the things I think that James focused back on as he writes this book.
Mm-hmm. And I think with it, and it's a beautiful tie together, I believe, because the Lord said it first.
Yeah. The
Lord said it first, and then James emphasizes and reaffirms the same message that the Lord said, the Lord brought to us. And when we have these kinds of thoughts and when we have these kinds of attitudes, then the seed whose fruit is righteous is sown in peace by those who make peace. The result is there. The result is positive. The result is godly. The result is the way God would have it be this morning. Okay. Is there any thoughts, questions, ideas on chapter 3 here this morning? All right. Well, Billy's going to be back in the saddle on Wednesday night, and we'll pick up then with chapter 4, and we'll start the lesson there from there. Okay. Appreciate your help this morning. Great class. Thank you.